I think a joke that really lands is when she goes into details about like astrology and not astrology, astronomy. She's like, my Sagittarius moon is not lined up right now. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of I Finally Watched. I'm Milan.
And this is David, and today I finally watched Wet Hot American Summer.
So there are exactly two reasons why we decided to do this movie. Reason number one, it has the word summer in the title of the film. And reason number two is you haven't seen it. I watched this, obviously not way back in 2001 when it first came out. I think I actually watched the Netflix kind of sequel to this back in like 2016, whenever that was. And then it prompted me to watch the original. And watching it that way, it was kind of a weird thing because obviously you're supposed to watch, the movie, the 2001 movie first, and then get all the references that are mentioned in the show. But in doing it the way I did it, I still got all the references from the movie that it was referencing in the show. And I was just so surprised at how many like characters were brought back and how many like running gags from the movie continued onto the show. But I think, in my opinion, this movie almost reminds me of kind of a very drawn out SNL skit.
Yeah.
And I think the show did a better job in just making it more like plot oriented and like important feeling, much more like character weight on the show. But this was just stupid and fun, and I think they nail it. I think some jokes are really funny, and then some jokes kind of belong in 2001.
Yeah, so I was watching it, and I don't know, I can't remember exactly what point. Probably when they go into town and all do like heroin and meth and all that, and then they come back and they're like, going to town's great, even if it's just for an hour. And you're like, oh, okay. Like the tone of it is like a raunchier Mel Brooks Naked Gun type movie, like
a parody.
Yeah, it's a parody. It's absurd, but it's not really parodying anything specific, so it's just kind of absurdist. And what's funny is normally, like, my process is to kind of like take notes, and I was just like, you don't really do that for this type of movie. Like, I still have some stuff, but it like the plot does not matter because it's not real. And so it was interesting. I basically I was like, I need to take this less serious. And like there are moments where I'm like, oh, that's pretty funny. That's pretty funny. And then like I completely like bust out laughing because I was like, oh, that's hilarious. And so like I agree with you. Some of it doesn't work so well. And it was funny too is like the little bit of plot there is. I guess there's like two kind of main plot. There's a main plot, a plot like 1A / like 1B, and then like one sort of bigger side plot, and then a bunch of tiny ones, like,
right.
And
right.
The main plot being the Coop and Katie, like, will they, won't they, which who gives a shit? And in the end, when it doesn't work out the way you would think, like, you're like, oh, that's actually pretty well written that they went, like, they zag at the very end like this.
Well, it's funny because when you were saying how like absurd and asinine this whole thing is, it actually has a very real, grounded ending that like that almost mimics real life. Like it's not one of those perfect movie-esque sort of endings, and it's actually one of my favorite things about the movie is the way it does zag. The other thing too is, so obviously we have the Coop and Katie plot, but then we also have the camp director falling for the astrophysicist camp neighbor guy, who I thought they were going to go in a much creepier way with him because they made him look like a total like typical weirdo. Um, with like the glasses and the mustache and the khaki shorts and but then they like really like made this character like extremely likable. At least he was to me.
Yeah.
And so at the end, where that was the only relationship that actually worked out, well, that one and Molly Shannon's, but we'll get into that one later.
All right.
But when that relationship really worked out, I was just like, okay, I guess I was rooting for them all along, you know. So let's start. Let's start with the fact that it's a bunch of kids playing kids and a bunch of 16-year-olds really just playing 16-year-olds, and there's nothing weird about, 30-year-olds and 35-year-olds playing 16-year-olds.
Well, what's interesting is like they don't. So the only person's age we know, like two people's ages, I think, right? Molly Shannon says I'm 34, and then Katie, played by Marguerite Moreau, says I'm 16 at the very end. And you're like, what the fuck, really? And so she was.
You didn't get the fact that they're like Paul Rudd, Amy Poehler, Bradley Cooper. They're all like the more adult camp counselors are all supposed to be like 16 years old.
I guess that's the point, but Molly Shannon said she's 34, right? So like she's
Molly Shannon, the nurse and the director. I thought it was established that they were the only three adults.
I mean, maybe. Well, with that, the one woman named Nancy. I guess she was probably one of the adults. She's
the nurse, yeah.
Is that what she was? She was the nurse. Okay, yeah. So I don't even know if her name was Nancy. Honestly, Gail.
It's something.
Gail's Molly Shannon.
Gail's Molly Shannon. Yeah. No, it's okay. Well, we can stick with Nancy.
But it's funny is Paul Rudd would have been 32 when this came out, and Marguerite Moreau would have been 24 when this came out.
Well, Michael Showalter would have been 32, 31. Yeah, about the same. Everyone, yeah, like I said, everyone's in their 30s.
And what I didn't know, too, I just read before we started, is that Michael Showalter wrote this, along with the writer/director.
Something Wayne, right?
Yeah, right. So, which is funny, because I haven't really seen him in a whole lot besides this. I'm sure there's some other stuff.
This is the thing that ruined his career.
Yeah, too. And the other thing, too, and just from the top, is like, you're not rooting for him because he's such a fucking loser. Like, but not even like a likable loser. He's just like, every time he's like talking, I'm just like, oh, yeah, I don't. Yeah, Katie's better than you, man. Like, maybe you got to work on. As Christopher Maloney eventually tells him, you got to work on yourself first.
Yeah. Christopher Maloney's character as like the worn Vietnam cafeteria guy is such a character that, because I'm used to seeing him as like the cop from
SVU,
and so to see him in like this kind of role is so weird. But I didn't realize his like comedic timing is so perfect.
No, yeah, he's hilarious. I will say though that like. And I guess my one issue with the movie is like maybe some of it could possibly be I didn't know what I was getting into, and so I'm just like, oh, this isn't what I expected. But like some of the more like just kind of absurd stuff I thought was just like I guess it was so unreal that I was just like, it's not. I don't find it that funny. Like, but once the opposite of SNL where they put a joke into the ground and I'm like, okay, yeah, it's not funny anymore. The more they did jokes in this movie, like I started to enjoy it. Like the Molly Shannon thing, I started to enjoy more. The first Christopher Maloney stuff, I was just like, yeah, this isn't funny. And then he just kept going with it. And then the can of corn starts talking to him. I was like, okay, all right, yeah, you've won me over. And then the other thing I noticed from the start is I was like, Paul Rudd's not a real character. Like he's not a real person. I was like, the other people seem like real people. And I guess that was my first sign because I was like, yeah, he's not a real character. He's just like a fucking like cartoon. And then I was like, oh, that's what this movie is. Okay, I get it now.
Yeah. Yeah, basically, the Paul Rudd character loses me when he lets like two or three kids die. I was just like, okay, nothing in this fucking movie actually matters, right?
Well, and then him
Uh,
throw like the other kids say something to him, and he like goes on a drive with them and throws them out of the car.
Whenever they become suspicious of like malintent in the camp, they they just end up missing too. So the character Victor, who's like Coop's friend in this, I don't know why, but they're like freaking out that Vic is like making calls from inside the camp, and like the only other phone is in the infirmary. So when they go into the infirmary, they start freaking out and like breaking everything in their wake. And
It's the least funny joke to me in the entire thing is that part.
well, so it was to me too. However, the fact that they kept going with it, like this is what you meant by like just like jokes that they run into the ground. The fact that they kept breaking stuff and kept freaking out and kept breaking stuff, to me it got funnier and funnier the more they did it.
Yeah, that was the only part that didn't work for me. I was just like, all right,
No,
yeah,
it
I'm
didn't
not.
work for you.
The other thing too, you brought this up before we started, but so the main storyline of like Coop is in love with Katie, and Katie's like, "Oh, I want to find you a girl." And as she walks away, he's like, "I want you inside me." She's like, "Wait, what?"
That joke is also repeated with like the cafeteria guy where he says inane shit and then people are like, "Wait, what'd you say?" And he comes up with some like really poorly rhyming thing, you know?
I thought his ending was not great too. Like the when he actually just starts humping the fridge, I was like, okay, I get it, I guess. But I did like getting back to jokes we liked. The professor, played by David Hyde Pierce. At first, he like I think he gets mad because she makes a Star Trek reference, but then immediately is like, oh, no, I do want to like sleep with you. So he like tries to show interest in her again, and she's like, she kind of leaves. So he's like, oh, I have to go fucking teach these kids at the camp, right? And
No, I don't think it was the Star Trek reference that he was mad at. He said no and she kept pushing him and he was like, "I said no."
well, when she made the Star Trek reference, he like turned around and was like, okay. But he comes into the camp and he's like, hey, do you guys know where like the how do I say this? The indoor kids are, and they point over there, and he looks. He's like, "Oh yeah."
um when when they're building up like their relationship and they're running to Nancy, which is her name by the way, and like they run up past her and they're like, "Where can I find a book about astrophysicists?" And she's like, "A library or a bookstore?" And they're like, "Oh yeah." And then he runs past and he's like, "Where can I find a book about camp directing?"
She's like,
And
also library.
yeah, and then when they like meet up the next time they meet up, I think a joke that really lands is when she goes into details about like astrology and not astrology, astronomy. She's like, my Sagittarius moon is not lined up right now. No, the and she's like, and he like is enamored by her and like very impressed. And then as they're walking away, and he's like, "Yeah, man, this camp. You know, the first camp was founded in 1939 or some shit like that."
No, yeah, that was funny. I I think that them going and both being in the library, like the first of all, I think the funniest one of the funniest scenes is the town scene when they go into town, like we said, all the drugs. They rob a lady.
No, it's like a bender. It's like they smoke some weed and they drink some alcohol, and that leads them to hardcore heroin.
Yeah, like a crack house, basically. I think that part is great. Also, not to be too lecherous, but Elizabeth Banks looks really great in this. And like when she comes in and like starts cheating with Paul Rudd, it's funny. And like in a normal movie, you might be like, "Oh, fucking Paul Rudd, I fucking hate him in this." But just this movie doesn't matter, so you're like it's just kind of interesting. Like it's so weird to like wrap my head around what this is. You know, really like
But I think you described it perfectly when you said it's a cartoon. It's a live action cartoon.
Right. Also, two characters we haven't mentioned: Bradley Cooper and Amy Poehler, and this is like obviously both before both of them were big. Um, and the Amy Poehler character is interesting. It's like it's like a slightly tweaked version of her Parks and Rec character, right? Like still super charismatic about things, she like cares about things and right, but just like she's more of a bitch in this, whereas in like Parks and Rec she's more lovable, at least, second season on. And Bradley Cooper is funny, like it just seeing him do this and like the way he started his movies to what he is now, like one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. It's funny to go back and see him in this.
I feel like Bradley Cooper is a perfect that guy, especially back in his like beginning career. I remember seeing him in Wedding Crashers, and then I remember
Yeah.
seeing him in the A Team as Face. And I remember watching Wedding Crashers and having no fucking idea who he was, and then watching the A Team, recognizing him on who he was, but I couldn't place him. And I literally was like to myself, I was like, oh, it's that guy. But now it's like fucking Bradley Cooper. I mean, who doesn't know Bradley Cooper?
Well, for me, I think he was more established once the A Team came out. But yeah, like Wedding Crashers, you're just like, oh, this guy's a great asshole, and that's like the first that's it may not be the first thing I saw him. It's the first thing I saw him in and like recognized him and was like, oh, I'm now going to know that guy going forward. I
Yeah.
could also imagine that if you went to a summer camp that you would talk like the robot kid.
Wait, me personally?
Yeah, yeah.
Go fuck yourself. First of all, that kid saves the fucking day at the end, okay? And second of all,
is he responsible for moving the satellite?
I don't know, dude. I don't know, but and that's a whole plot line that we have to talk about because it's so random and so out of left field. But the thing is, though, is that yes, like maybe at that age I was the weird kid who liked bugs a little too much, but I didn't fucking like keep to myself and like pretend I was an alien. Okay, I'm not. I was weird. I wasn't psychotic.
Okay. Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean,
No, no, no.
yes.
You don't understand. I am very passionate about this. Okay.
I may have been a loser, but not to that extreme. So I want to
exactly.
We've already talked about the van crashing and that guy, saying he had sex with a lot of women, but then he's like, "No, I'm actually a virgin." And the other driver's like, "Wow, you're a fucking loser." But I want to get to the gay romance of the movie, and to start with, so we don't know about it until like Michael Ian Black, the other cook, and JJ like see these girls going into the water, and what's at one point you see like one of the girls take off the other girl's top, and I was like, is this gonna be a nude scene? And then it cuts back to it, and they're all still wearing like their bathing suits. It's like, oh, okay, it was like a weird. It's perfect. Like it's the type of movie that it doesn't matter that stuff like that happens because you're just like, oh, maybe it was meant to, maybe it wasn't.
Do you know how when in Family Guy, Peter references something as like a cutaway scene,
Mm-hmm.
and or like even if it's not a cutaway scene, Peter's like, fucking gets his head blown off or something, and then it's just like the rest of the show is perfectly normal and everyone acts like nothing happened. It's like that.
Exactly. Still disappointing, but whatever. And then Michael Ian Black walks away, and they're like, "Oh man, why is he like this? We got to get him laid." And then you get this like very sensual, like gay sex scene that doesn't actually show anything, but like shows a lot of thrusting between Michael Ian Black and Bradley Cooper.
It's hilarious because the whole time that that's going on, you hear their discussion about how like lame and virginal and that it's completely reliant on them to get McKinley laid, and they're like, oh yeah, we got to get him laid. What about Abby? What about Jessica? Oh yeah, Jessica. We really gotta get him with Jessica, or whatever. The entire time he's just banging the fuck out of Bradley Cooper.
Very centrally though. And then like the gay marriage ceremony afterwards that they see, and they're like, I don't think it's a slur I'm going to say on here, but they're that was one thing that like definitely aged differently. I guess we can talk about it real quick. Is they use that it's like progressive movie, right? But like it's a comedy, so they use like the F word. I'm gonna say it, and then what's funny is they call him that, and then later on they're like, hey, you two, we've got something for you. Oh, here's a Shea Lounge.
Yeah,
they're like, oh my
yeah.
gosh, that's exactly what we wanted. And then the Molly Shannon joke where she ends up with this like 10-year-old or 12-year-old or 13-year-old, whatever. Like, one, that joke was probably fine in 2001. Today you could not do it. And I don't think in 2001 you could have switched the genders of those two people.
No, yes, and no. You're absolutely right. And it's such a weird, like, because the entire time that little kid is like her support system, like really talking her through like the divorce with her ex and like not wanting to get back with him and stuff like that. And I thought it was just kind of this like almost like a therapist role that this kid was playing out. I didn't realize. I don't know if you're supposed to realize until the very end that they're like now romantically involved with each other. But yeah, you're right. It's very weird. Especially that she's not one of like she's not supposed to be one of like the 16-year-old camp counselors, you know?
Yeah, right. Yeah, she says her age. I think it's the ending though. It does like really work for me because it's unexpected. Then you're like, oh, that's really funny. Like, it's funny, and I appreciate that they like went for it. You could not go for that anymore.
Molly Shannon playing like a wrecked divorcee. The scene where she's like, "Yeah, we're gonna color with these crayons," and she pulls out a brown, and the little girl, is like, "Why can't we do it with these markers?" She's like, I just don't get it. There's a lot of them and they're multicolored. There's only one brown crayon. And then Molly Shannon just breaks down in tears. For me, I laughed so hard at that. I thought that was hilarious.
Right. The next thing that I really want to talk about is like we get back on the Katie and Coop thing, and they like them keep changing shirts because like they're cold. He's like, oh, I'm cold, and she takes his shirt, and then their jacket, whatever, is really funny. And then they make out, but like an underrated line in this, because there are a ton of Jewish jokes in this movie, but Coop calls his parents, and they're like, yeah, I met a girl, it's great. He's like, I don't think so. She does have a big nose, though. Like, it's totally like his parents are like, is she Jewish?
Yeah. Yeah. And I love the camp counselor, the camp director, who's like, hey, Coop, maybe you shouldn't get like too far ahead of yourself. And he turns around and he's like, it's okay, silly. It's just be happy for me, sort of thing. And then he walks away, and then she's like, okay, whatever. That was weird. Like, she doesn't actually give a shit.
Yeah, I tried. I'm done with it.
So back to the Katie thing, because she's going back and forth between Coop and Paul Rudd, right? And Paul Rudd is basically cheating on her with Elizabeth Banks. Which is like, Paul Rudd did this movie just to make out with two super hot actresses. I guarantee you.
I don't know. Have you talked to him about it?
Yeah. Personal text thread. But the scene where he gets absolutely disgusted by Elizabeth Banks having barbecue sauce on her face, and then every time it cuts back to her, she has more barbecue sauce on her face. That scene, you can't deny that was one of the funniest scenes.
I enjoyed it. I really did. The Maloney ending we already talked about. But when we get back to
did you recognize the voice of the can of vegetables?
It was Archer.
Okay, so it's funny that you say that because I know him as Bob from Bob's Burgers, but it's H. John Benjamin who does a lot of this like voice.
Right,
stuff.
he has a very distinct voice. I haven't watched Bob's Burgers, although I know he's the voice of both. It's a very similar voice. I think he has such a distinct voice that it's like somewhat hard for him to change his. You know what I mean? Like to not know it's him.
I feel like it's like the way he goes into a character. Like Bob is more him as a person, and then Archer is he just kind of like goes in it with a little bit more like masculinity, you know?
Did you ask him about that? Is that what he said? On the thread with Paul Rudd, him and Paul
I don't
Rudd?
know why why I have to have like a personal relationship to just guess people's like motivation.
So I want to get back to David Hyde Pierce and Janine Garofalo. One of and this is like a straight Naked Gun joke. They're walking together, and he's like, "Hey, can we meet later in like 10 seconds to discuss this?" And she's like, "Yeah, sure." And then exactly 10 seconds pass. She walks over, and he's like, "The Skylab is falling," which I love. At the end, it's just this fucking metal cylinder, and it's just a Skylab on the side. I'm like, all right, there it is.
Yeah, the fact that they pass that picnic table like literally 5 seconds before he says that, and then when she goes over there, it's like full of kids and like equipment and stuff. The other thing about it too is like he's like, we need a random number generator that randomizes numbers between 1 and 20. It's like, where are we supposed to find that, boss? He's like, it's a supercomputer. And he's like, well, would this 20-sided dice work?
The D&D kid is great. He's like really funny. It's super cringy in the beginning. Although it could have been worse, but like with the girls when he's trying to get them to play D&D, he just keeps asking. I wanted to get to this part. It's the one part where I'm just like, that is really fucking weird in this movie. So this movie takes place in what, like either Maine or New York, like somewhere in between.
Sure.
'Cause I know Coop's from Maine, like Northeast, whatever. When Coop goes to Andy after she's basically told him yesterday was a mistake, and he gives her this whole speech, and he runs off. Coop then goes to Andy, who's in his bunk, and above Andy's bunk is a Confederate flag.
Okay. So you noticed it too.
I was like, what the fuck is that doing there? What's even the point of that?
I like to think that it's like this character that we're not supposed to like, but like it's Paul Rudd, so of course we're gonna like it. So like him. So the writers are like, we have to make him subtly racist.
The thing was though, like a Confederate flag in 2001, like it was just like more commonplace in television stuff. So like if you had that in a TV show now, you'd be like, oh, that guy's a fucking asshole. But in 2001, like it appeared in shows a lot. But this is like a very liberal leaning movie, to then just have that sitting over his bed and like not address it is very weird.
Would it have been better if it was like one of those like "don't tread on me" snake flags, or like is this like pretty like this is the worst?
It was so odd to have it as just a background piece that is not mentioned. And I don't know, like, it's probably something that in 2001 was, like, not brought up, and people are just like, oh, yeah, so he's an asshole. But, like, it's like, I think if this movie was made now, one, it just wouldn't be there. But two, if it was there, it would be a more deliberate thing that would be mentioned. So I just...
Maybe the fact that it was... Yeah, I mean, maybe you're right. Maybe the fact that it was supposed to take place in 1981 and Paul Rudd wore cut-off jean jackets, that the production designer was like, you know what? This is the type of character that would chill with a Confederate flag hanging above his bed. You know?
I guess. Maybe he's just like a big Dukes of Hazzard fan, so who knows?
Exactly. Exactly.
The Coop and Christopher Maloney montage is pretty fucking good.
That was one of my favorite scenes, where it was just like, it was a dancing montage, a training montage, and for absolutely no reason, just the payoff that he looked 10 times cooler with that haircut at the end than he did through the whole fucking movie. Also, I love how he matches the outfit with the cut off shirt,
right?
The midriff.
It kind of felt like it kept getting shorter and shorter.
Maybe it did.
Then we get to the talent show, and the Skylab is going to land on the rec hall. You knew that the old guy, Alan Shepard, was played by Coop, right?
Yes, I'm not an idiot. It was in the text thread. Okay.
I was like, did he dress up like this? My first thought was like, he dressed up like this old guy. His jokes are killing, and then he's going to reveal it's him. And Katie's been like, oh, that guy is funny, right? My favorite part of the talent show was the kid comedian who's like, yeah, white people sound like this when they get mad. And then the guy out there is like, that's true. That's true.
Uh, yeah. The At the end where Coop comes in and he's all cool and he hands her the little box and then she pulls it out and it's the jacket. I thought it was gonna be stupid, but like out of anything that could have been in that box, the jacket actually was like that made sense. That was like the only thing that made sense in the fucking show. When he walks in with like his fresh shoes and his haircut and the bandana and the cut off shirt, the way Paul Rudd looks at him, he like turns around and he's like,
The other funny thing Paul Rudd does when the robot kid steps up and then starts controlling the wind, Paul Rudd's just shredding with like a fake guitar as the wind's hitting him for no reason.
So yeah, it was either the weird kid who actually could communicate with aliens, who actually moved the thing in the weather. I love like the nerds who were like reminiscing about it the next day. They were like, "We did that, right? Not the weird wind thing." And the astrophysicist is like, yeah, we did that.
I like how he gets the Hopkins Award and it looks like a T-ball baseball trophy. And then
Yeah.
he hands it to someone off camera, like to hold it. And he's like, "I know we've been trying. It already worked. I'm pregnant." Like that whole bit is really good.
I'm glad you like that. I thought it was just so fucking random. So we get to the end of the movie, and my favorite part of this whole movie is at the end. You think Coop and Katie are like a thing, and then at the very end, he's like, "So I'm gonna talk with my parents, and we can get together, next break." And she's like, Coop, listen, I'm 16, and I'm sure if I were older and things were different, and you're such a nice guy, but all I'm thinking about is sex. Sex with Andy. Not even sex with you. Because the only thing going through it's just she lets him down and he's just like taking it like a champ. He's like, "Yeah, okay."
That all makes sense.
But yeah, she it's kind of a depressing ending for a comedy, but I thought it worked because like you said, you're never like really rooting for Coop anyways.
Right. And then the after credit scene I think is really funny because it's like the callback to like 10 years from now, let's just meet here at like, and just as we are. And they're like, "Well, what time?" And he's like, "I don't know. Let's say 9, so we'll all show up at 9:30." And they're like, "Well, how about we be adults and we say 9:30 and we show up at 9:30?" And the other guy comes and like when the guy comes in, he's like, "Oh, I thought we said 9:30." He's like, "No, we all said 9, so we'd be here at 9:30." And then the movie just cuts.
I had to pause it because I had to see how everyone was dressed.
Me too.
And
Yeah, me too.
everyone's just dressed so like guys are like gray suits and the girls are just like white dresses.
Yep. Yeah. You know what's funny is the Michael Showalter who plays Coop, he reminds me of someone who could have been in like Kicking and Screaming, just like one of those dudes at like college. Like he could have played one of those characters.
Yeah. He in the 10-year later after credit scene, the way they had him like made up, he had like 5 o'clock
Shadow.
shadow and thank you. Yeah. 5 o'clock shadow and like his hair's like slicked back or whatever. And I was like, "Oh, he's not like a horrendous looking guy." But in the whole movie, they make him look so bad. Like they make him look like the ugliest motherfucker.
I think it's just the hair. Because Ken Marino is not a bad looking dude either. But then with the curly hair that Victor has, he looks like, not great. So overall,
Hair can do so much for someone.
overall, I liked this movie. Like I said, I had several moments where I laughed out loud.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm glad we did it.
Yeah, I just love how we just shit talked this movie, and we're like, yeah, at the end, you know what? Not so bad, not so bad at all.
I think you're playing up like the couple of parts that I didn't like. You're like, "Ah, fuck it, we said it sucks." Like, no, there are a couple jokes that no longer work. There's a very weird Confederate flag above a bed. There's like you just got a couple things that I have questions about, but like, yeah, otherwise it's a very good movie.
You should watch the show because I feel like the show really like ties things together, and I think it's genuinely funnier. So I think you'll enjoy that. Well, thanks for listening to another episode of I Finally Watched. I'm Milan.
And this is David, and I finally watched Wet Hot American Summer.